All right, welcome in, everyone. We're diving deep today into, the Passover.
The Passover.
As described in Exodus 12.
Yeah.
So we're looking at a section of the Bible.
That's right.
Specifically the book of Exodus, chapter 12.
Yep.
And this chapter, it details how it all began. The very first Passover celebrated by the Israelites.
That's right.
So we're going to be unpacking quite a story here.
Yeah.
A story of dramatic escape, a mysterious plague.
Right.
And a meal with, some very specific instructions.
Very.
Definitely not your average dinner party.
It's fascinating because the Passover isn't just some historical event.
Right.
It's a foundational story.
It really is.
For both Judaism and Christianity.
Absolutely. And
it's a big one.
It all starts with the Israelites enslaved in Egypt, desperately seeking freedom.
Right. And it wasn't just about physical liberation.
No.
It was also a yearning for spiritual freedom.
Okay.
A return to their covenant with God. A covenant you can think of as a binding agreement.
Right.
In this case, between God and the Israelites.
And speaking of fresh starts, Exodus 12.2 actually tells us that the Passover is considered the beginning of months.
Yes.
Their first month of the year.
Exactly.
So a total reset.
So they're not just escaping.
Right.
They're starting their calendar over a total reset. And to prepare for this new beginning, there are some incredibly detailed instructions about preparing the Passover lamb.
Okay, so Exodus 12.5 is super specific. The lamb has to be a year-old male without a single blemish.
Wow.
And it can be a sheep or a goat. I was surprised they had options there.
It is interesting, but that perfect unblemished lamb,
Yeah.
that's a powerful image.
Yeah.
Representing purity and sacrifice.
Uh-huh.
You actually see this symbolism carry through in Christian theology as well.
Wow, so interesting.
And the instructions for eating this meal are just as detailed.
You're not kidding. Exodus 12.8 says it must be roasted, not boiled or raw, and served with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Plus, they had to eat it all in one night.
All of it.
Talk about a feast with a deadline.
It's more than just a meal.
Right.
It's a ritual. Think about it. Roasted lamb, unleavened bread,
Okay.
bitter herbs.
Yeah.
Each element has symbolic weight.
Interesting.
The roasting represents purification by fire.
Oh.
The unleavened bread represents the urgency of their escape.
I see.
He didn't even have time for the bread to rise.
Yeah.
And those bitter herbs.
Yeah.
A constant, tangible reminder of the bitterness of slavery.
Wow. And Exodus 12.11 really drives home the point. Dressed to travel, your sandals on your feet and your staff in your hand. They weren't settling in for a nice long dinner. They were on the move.
Exactly. Imagine that energy, the anticipation. They were ready to walk out at a moment's notice.
Wow.
And all this is happening while the 10th and final plague is about to strike Egypt.
Which is terrifying. Exodus 12.29 describes the death of the firstborn in Egypt, both humans and animals.
It's a powerful image.
But the Israelites, those who marked their doors with lamb's blood, they were spared.
The blood is such a loaded symbol across cultures.
Yeah.
Often associated with both life and death.
Yeah.
In this case, it's a symbol of the covenant between God and the Israelites.
Okay.
Representing divine protection for those who followed his commands.
So it's more than just a mark. It's a visual representation of faith and obedience. And amidst all of this, the Israelites are holding vigil, anxiously waiting for God to deliver them from Egypt, as described in Exodus 12.42.
That concept of vigil is powerful, this idea of staying awake, alert,
Right.
in a heightened state of awareness and anticipation.
Yeah.
It's not unique to Passover.
Right.
You see this in various religious traditions. It speaks to a deep spiritual practice of waiting and watching for divine intervention.
It's like they're on high alert, waiting for the signal. And finally, after centuries of enslavement, the moment of liberation arrives. They leave Egypt with their unleavened dough, and according to Exodus 12.36, even take some riches given to them by the Egyptians.
It's interesting because Exodus 12.38 mentions a mixed multitude leaving alongside the Israelites.
Oh.
This wasn't just an exodus of people of Israelite descent.
Right.
There were others who yearned for freedom and joined them.
Interesting.
It makes you think about how this exodus had a ripple effect far beyond what we might initially imagine.
It's like this desire for freedom was contagious, and it crossed cultural and ethnic boundaries.
Absolutely. But the Passover, with all its rituals and symbolism, becomes the framework for their newfound freedom.
Okay.
It's not just about escaping. It's about understanding their identity,
Right.
their purpose, and how they'll move forward as a people.
It's almost like they're building a nation on the go.
Yeah.
And this ritual, the Passover, is becoming the cornerstone.
Precisely. And that raises so many questions.
Yeah.
How do you maintain a sense of unity and purpose in the midst of such upheaval?
Yeah.
How do you transmit these traditions and this story to future generations? It wasn't just about escaping Egypt.
Yeah.
It was about building a future together. And that brings us to a crucial point.
Okay.
The Passover.
Yeah.
It wasn't meant to be a one-time event.
Right.
Exodus 12.14 calls it a lasting ordinance, something to be celebrated perpetually by the Israelites and their descendants.
It makes sense, right? I mean, this was a pivotal moment in their history. Their liberation from slavery.
Yeah.
They wouldn't want to forget that. But how do you make sure a story and its meaning are passed down accurately through generations, especially without the internet?
Well, that's where Exodus 12.2627 comes in.
Okay.
It highlights the importance of questions.
Questions.
Children are instructed to ask their parents about the meaning of the Passover,
Interesting.
ensuring each generation actively engages with the story and its significance.
So it's like a built-in teaching moment woven right into the celebration itself. It reminds me of how families today still ask each other questions about the Passover Seder.
Exactly.
Keeping those traditions alive.
Precisely. It's a brilliant way to connect the past to the present and to transmit values across generations. But there's another layer to this story that we need to examine, Exodus 12.403.
Yeah.
It lays out some very specific rules about who could participate in the Passover.
You're talking about the requirement of circumcision for foreigners who wanted to join in the celebration.
Yes.
To be honest, that seems a bit harsh.
It does, from a modern perspective.
Yeah.
But we have to consider the social and religious norms of the time.
Sure.
Circumcision was a sign of belonging to the covenant, of being part of the community.
So it wasn't about excluding people, but rather about maintaining the integrity of their beliefs and practices. It was about defining what it meant to be part of that Israelite community.
Exactly. And it reminds us that even stories of liberation and universal values can be expressed within particular cultural and historical contexts.
I see.
It challenges us to think about how we define belonging and community, even today.
I think that's a really important point. We often view historical events through our modern lens, but it's crucial to understand the context in which they occurred.
Absolutely. And speaking of context, imagine you're one of the Israelites leaving Egypt.
Okay.
You're free from slavery, but you're also stepping into uncharted territory.
Right.
It must have been exhilarating and terrifying at the same time.
Talk about a mixed bag of emotions. They're free.
Yeah.
But now what?
Yeah.
Where do they go from here?
And that's where the Passover, with all its rituals and symbolism, provides a framework for navigating that uncertainty.
Okay.
It gives them a sense of identity, purpose, and continuity as they embark on their journey toward the Promised Land.
So the Passover wasn't just about remembering the past.
Right.
It was about shaping their future as a people.
Exactly.
It gave them a shared story, a common ground to build upon.
Precisely. It was a celebration of liberation, a reminder of God's protection, and a ritual that bound them together as a community. And that sense of community, that shared experience, would be essential as they faced the challenges ahead.
It's amazing how this ancient ritual served so many purposes.
Right.
It's a history lesson, a spiritual practice, a community builder, and a guide for the future, all rolled into one.
And that's the power of tradition, isn't it?
Yeah.
It connects us to something larger than ourselves, to our past, and to our future. And that connection can be incredibly powerful, especially in times of uncertainty or transition.
It makes you wonder how these traditions evolve over time. I mean, we're talking about a story that's thousands of years old, and it's still being celebrated today.
That's the beauty of it. Each generation interprets and adapts these traditions in their own way, keeping them relevant and meaningful.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the question of what this all means for us today.
Right.
Thousands of years after the first Passover. What can we take away from this story? How does it resonate with people who may not be Jewish or religious?
Right, because clearly this story has transcended its original context. It's become part of our collective consciousness in a way.
Absolutely. I think on a basic level, it's a story about freedom, about overcoming oppression. It speaks to that universal human desire for liberation, both physically and spiritually.
Right.
We all have those moments where we feel trapped, limited, or held back in some way.
Yeah.
And the Passover story offers a message of hope and resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, freedom is possible.
It's like that universal yearning for a fresh start, for a chance to break free from whatever's holding us back.
Exactly. And it reminds us that even in the darkest of times, There's always hope. The Israelites were enslaved for centuries.
Right.
But they never gave up on the idea of freedom.
And their faith in God,
Right.
their belief that he would deliver them, played a huge role in their eventual liberation.
Absolutely. It highlights the power of faith and resilience in the face of adversity. But I think the Passover also challenges us to think about what it means to be a community.
You're talking about those rules about who could participate, the importance of shared rituals and traditions.
Yes, but also the idea of collective responsibility.
Okay.
The Israelites weren't just individuals seeking freedom.
Right.
They were a people bound together by a common history,
Yeah.
a shared covenant. Their liberation wasn't just about individual escape,
Right.
but about building a future together.
So their freedom was intertwined,
Yeah.
dependent on each other. They had to rely on that sense of community to survive and thrive.
Precisely. And that raises some interesting questions for us today.
Okay.
What are the shared stories, the rituals, the values that bind us together as communities? How can we ensure that those traditions are passed down to future generations so their meaning isn't lost?
It's like we're all searching for that sense of belonging, that connection to something larger than ourselves. And the Passover story reminds us that those connections are forged through shared experiences, through stories, and through rituals that bind us together.
It's about finding that balance between individual freedom and collective responsibility, recognizing that our liberation, our well-being, is often intertwined with the well-being of others.
It's a powerful message, and one that's especially relevant in today's world, where we're often faced with division and isolation.
The Passover story offers a different model, one based on shared history, shared values, and a collective commitment to freedom and justice.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the Passover, here's something to consider. How does this ancient story resonate with your life? Does it speak to your personal struggles for freedom, your hopes for a better future, or your sense of belonging within a community?
Maybe it prompts you to think about the traditions that have shaped your life.
Yeah.
Or the stories that bind you to your family and community, whatever your takeaway.
Yeah.
The Passover story offers a timeless message of hope, resilience, and the enduring power of community.
Thanks for joining us on this journey through Exodus 12. We hope you've gained some new insights into this ancient story and its relevance for our lives today.